All right, Alexander, let's answer the questions from the live stream with Robert Barnes. And let's start off with Death Dealer, who says, if you've seen through the eyes of video, she was reading an article saying that Ukraine will attack Poland and blame it on Russia. Very desperate people.
Well, yes, they are becoming increasingly desperate people. They've already done that, of course. I mean, I don't know that they did it intentionally, but there was that business of the missile that fell into Poland, which it was subsequently and conclusively established was a Ukrainian missile. And of course, they blamed it on Russia. And the Poles were very angry about it.
Sanjeva says, thank you, moderators, for keeping the trolls out of Duran conversation and helping our Alex and Alexander. Thank you, Sanjeva. Tatiana, thank you for that super sticker. Abdi says, cry for me, Argentina. Fragments of USSR says, Alexander, in the spirit of the movie Carnival Night, let me congratulate you on the disaster as a British citizen. It must have been most reassuring to find out that the epitome of political prowess, Lord Hug a Hoodie Cameron, is back.
Indeed, yeah, you're quite right. I mean, you put it perfectly. Actually, I've just been seeing, by the way, some of the latest opinion polling. Now, the Conservatives, according to this opinion poll, are on 21%. 21%. I mean, this is catastrophic figures. Change UK, which note for the moment is not yet led by Nigel Farage, he might be coming back, is already on 10%. And there is, I think, massive scepticism about the Labour Party as well. Their polling figures are much higher. They're in the 40s. But I don't think there's much enthusiasm or support for them. So that gives you a sense of the dismal state of our politics in Britain. And bringing back Cameron, well, we did a whole programme about it on the Duran, which I hope you've seen.
Tyler Durden says, gentlemen, thanks for all the information. Fragments of USSR says, gentlemen, I recently uploaded a video mentioning Bankman-Freed, whose successes was due to his mother's connections and political sponsorship of Dems. He maintains his innocence. What are the chances? What risks for the parents? Moves from the GOP.
No, I wouldn't have thought that they would go after the parents, actually. I don't know what exactly the whole role was, but let's not speculate too far about this kind of thing. What I would say is this: a lot of this is now going on. Obviously, with Bankman-Freed, that's in the United States, but it's a complicated operation that he was carrying out, which was basically, as far as I can see, shell companies and conjuring and the usual smokes and mirrors. I was rather upset just to learn that something not that dissimilar happened, obviously on a much smaller scale in Britain, involving a law firm which I once knew well, which is Inson Company, which is one of the big maritime law firms. Utterly solid, completely reliable. They were taken over by another law firm I'd never even heard of. And it turned out that the person who was running that particular law firm, the one that took over Inson Co., is now being accused, I stress accused, of doing many of the same kind of things that Bankman-Freed was doing. So we see that, it's becoming quite widespread, this kind of thing.
The Jackals of Terra Argentum says, as an Argentine expat and the grandson of someone who was in the Peron regime, I think his time was a disaster. He basically normalized the welfare state and laid the foundations for its latter woes.
Well, you may be right. I mean, I'm not an expert or, somebody who is hugely familiar about Argentine politics and Argentine economics. I would simply say this: he may have done many things in the 40s and 50s, but that was a long time ago now. And the fact that, Argentina hasn't been able to sort itself out since then suggests to me that there is some deep structural problem going on in Argentina, which I don't pretend I fully understand. For the record, by the way, since we did the program with Robert, it's become increasingly clear to me that Milei is not going to be quite the radical break that we all expected. Apparently, he's now going to retreat on his pledge to completely dollarized the economy. He's meeting with Maurizio Macri, the former president. Macri's picking most of the ministers, so far as I can see, in Milei's government. It looks to me more of the same, which I have to say I'm surprised and a little disappointed because I did think that it would be some kind of change, but there it is.
Red Viking says, how come many libtards love the Ukraine war but not the Gaza war? The massive demonstrations was not seen against the proxy war against Russia.
Well, that's exactly true. There's a straightforward reason for this, actually. It's not very complicated to understand, which is that Russia is the enemy of the liberals. I mean, it represents, traditional values, Christianity, all kinds of other things, masculinity, all these kind of things. We won't go into too many details, but that's their perspective. And, of course, the Palestinian cause is a very fashionable one amongst the same kind of people and has been for a long time. And if you want to understand why, and by the way, this isn't about the Palestinians, any comment about them. I mean, it's just a simple comment now about liberals. But if you want to understand why they like the Palestinian cause, think about the way they embraced BLM and all that represented.
Sanjeva says, this is one of two, actually, so let's start. Sorry, Alexander, for once I disagreed with your analysis in regards to the outcome of Islamic conference. I think the corruption and ineptness existing in most of these countries wasn't taken into account. Most of these governments propped up by the USA too, their children live in the West too. I think the most recent conference followed this pattern to pander to popular anger, unlikely for the conference to follow through.
I don't agree with this, but I mean, we'll just have to see which one of this is correct. I mean, I've made my own feelings about this very clear. I think that, on the contrary, it has been a much more sophisticated and clear-headed approach by the Islamic conference than one we've seen up to now, and I think it is having an effect. My own view is that the Biden administration is in a corner, and they know it, and they don't really have an answer to it.
Tish M says, question, Robert, if the Constitution is the only way to save the U.S., then why isn't it? I'd say that a military coup may be the only answer, FYI, not a vote harder fan.
No, I am not in favour of military coups. I experienced one in Greece when I was a child, and it completely upturned my life, and it did massive damage to people in my family, and it did massive damage to all kinds of people that I know and knew, and I think that we're still paying the price of it to this day. There was a political crisis in Greece before the coup, but the coup was no kind of solution to it. And I feel exactly the same way about the United States. Now, why is the Constitution not delivering? The reason it's not delivering is because the Constitution is being sabotaged. The mechanisms of the Constitution are no longer functioning. But the way to respond to that, or so it seems to me, is to uphold the Constitution, to point out the fact that the mechanisms are not functioning, and to organise and protest politically and mobilise Americans to defend it. And a military coup doesn't defend the Constitution. It completely upends and destroys it.
Anas Chehab says, Argentina was a great power long ago because it did not need to industrialize. Today, the landowners and the industrial sector still disagree about policy. No magic power move will fix that division.
I am not, again, I want to stress this, I am not an expert on Argentina's economic history or its political history or those kind of things. So I don't want to get too deeply into these issues. What I am going to say about this is I think Argentina did have, actually, and perhaps to some extent still does have, a significant industrial sector. My own sense is that a lot of Argentina's problems is not that there's a massive welfare system, which somebody pointed out before. I suspect the real problem is that there is a propensity on the part of some people in Argentina, including the big business interests, to load up with debt whenever they can. And I think that this has been what has been undermining Argentina. And I'm a little worried, now, I may be wrong here, that what we're going to see with Milei and the kind of changes that he's going to bring in, if he really does bring them in, is that they're going to be another opportunity for the same people in Argentina who've loaded up with debt in the past to do it all over again, so that you get this recurring pattern of debt crises and defaults and inflationary incidents, which have scarred Argentina and its history, well, throughout my lifetime.
Eric Hatchett, thank you for that super chat. The Jackals of Terra Argentum says, people who are shocked Caribbean people support Trump make me laugh. Protectionism is a core tenet of island politics. Well said. AI Gonzalez says, which is more likely, Trump or Zelensky being taken out by Western intel services? Great show.
I would have thought at the moment Zelensky's position in Kiev is hanging by a thread. If you're talking about, the kind of direct action that I think you're talking about, I don't want to talk about these things in too much detail because I feel sometimes that talking about them makes it more likely in some strange kind of way to bring them about. But I would say this, the political situation in Kiev, the political culture in Kiev is much more violent and dangerous than the one in the United States. And in fact, there is no comparison.
Anion Calorician says, thanks, guys, for all your news and analysis. Thank you for that. Fragments of the USSR says, Trump, the horseman of the apocalypse approaches. I thought Deep State handled him well during his 4 years. Why are they worried?
Well, good question. They do see it. I've been reading article after article. The British media, by the way, on this is going absolutely stark raving mad. And the locus of this madness, in my opinion, is the Financial Times. They really are talking about Trump as the fifth horseman of the apocalypse, who's galloping towards us. Partly, I think, the reason is that they understand that Donald Trump this time, if he becomes president, has all the experience of being president before. He's got a much better understanding of the political system than he did then. I think the other thing that they are worried about is that apparently he's putting together a much more formidable team this time than he did previously. So, I think there are those things. But I think also one of the reasons is that they are very frightened, that they are on the brink of becoming discredited themselves, that if Trump wins the election this time, the entire, caravan, the Clinton, Biden, liberal caravan will have once and for all fallen off a cliff, and there might not be an examination, there might not be a comeback, or at least not in the same sense, because people will be so angry and disgusted with them, and that there might this time be a proper accounting. Now, whether any of that's going to happen is another matter. But remember, if you've been doing all kinds of strange things in the background, you're always worried, you always feel insecure. So the sight of somebody who might, change that, bring you to account, is always going to make you very, very frightened and very nervous. And that makes you, by the way, also very dangerous.
Annan Calorician, thank you for that super sticker. Salila, thank you for that super sticker. The Jackals of Terra Argentum says, as a general rule, bureaucrats are bureaucrats because they're incapable of surviving outside of mediocrity. So always vote against their interests for the health of your republic. Argentina saying.
You are very profoundly right. Having worked close to within bureaucracies, state bureaucracies, and by the way, private bureaucracies as well. My father who had to deal with bureaucracies in the EU. He was constantly having to go to the EU and to in Greece and in other places, and even in the United States. He used to refer to the bureaucracies as the apsychoteras, this soulless monster. It's very difficult to convey the force of that in English, by the way. But you're quite absolutely correct. I mean, the people who succeed in bureaucracies are those who are most skilled at bureaucratic infighting. And as a grizzled veteran of all of that, I can tell you it is exhausting and completely demoralizing if your inclinations are not in that direction.
Pasha Moyer says Italy failed its populist uprising. Argentina maybe succeeded. Jury is still out on the U.S. Who may be next to give it a serious try?
I have to say straightforwardly, I'm beginning to wonder how actually populist the government in Argentina, the new government, is in fact going to be. It seems to me that a lot of what we saw in Italy is now playing out in Argentina too. Just saying, I mean, the jury is out and maybe things will change, but for the moment, it does look to me like more of the same. This is something that's become more clear since we did the program with Robert. Now, what's going to happen in the United States? That is the important one. That's the one which ultimately matters. I'm going to say this. I think the insurgency, the populist movements there are much deeper. They're far more sophisticated. They're far stronger in some ways than you find in other places. Whether they will be allowed to succeed or able to succeed or not, that is a question I find impossible to answer at this time.
The Jackals of Terra Argentum says La Plata has been the heart of Peronism in Argentina since the 1970s, but it apparently went for Milei. Massive coup on his part.
Oh, absolutely, no question. Yes, but is he going to do all the things that he said he was going to do? As I said, I understand that Macri, who was the president before the current president. He was the conservative president who was then defeated by the Peronists. But anyway, his popularity is apparently down to single figures, and yet he's the person whom it seems to me Milei is turning to. And that would La Plata have voted overwhelmingly for Milei had they known in advance that was what Milei was going to do, pick up the phone and start having meetings with Macri. I wonder.
Tree 3 Climber says BLM got pallets of bricks. J6 go to jail. If Donald J. Trump called in the National Guard, he'd been arrested for an insurrection on J6.
Yeah, I agree with you actually, basically.
Torsten Mush, thank you for that super sticker. Divine Insurgent said, do you have live streams anywhere else? Maybe Odyssey? I'm getting sick of all the adverts on YT. Yes, we are on Odyssey with live streams and Rumble as well. Elza says, it looks like today democracy is the biggest threat to democracies in the West.
That's beautifully put, yes. I mean, of course, you've got to distinguish between democracy and our democracy, as certain people in the Democratic Party and the in Britain and in Germany refer to it. Our democracy is not quite the same thing as what you and I think of when we talk about democracy.
Abdi Yamochari says, if you want to know who rules over you, just look for who you are not allowed to criticize. Voltaire.
Absolutely true. That is so correct.
Tree 3 Climber says the Pentagon can't account for $2 to $3 trillion.
No, certainly it was some loose change. I mean, you can't expect them to keep an accurate record of such tiny amounts of money. Just saying.
Mark Bumgardner says, thank you, gentlemen. Tatiana Carmichael, thank you for that super sticker. Controlled Demolition says, I got the same shirt as Alexander on. Thank you, Duran, for your example of excellence. OMG Puppies says, have you all commented on events in Spain, the so-called socialist coup?
Well, yes, we have. I mean, we did it extensively in our live stream. And it's still playing out, by the way. There is a great deal of anger in Spain about this, and all the usual people are defending Sanchez. But I wonder whether this government is going to survive very long, actually.
J.H. Scott 6, thank you for that super sticker. Joanna, thank you for that super sticker. Life of Brian says there's no advantage to Trump going all in for Israel after the death of Adelson. Trump's whole advantage is that he isn't a Republican.
Well, we will see what Trump does. I mean, I think Trump, as a human being, as a individual, has very, very strong sympathies for Israel. And, don't just think that it was purely political calculations that decided him to take the line that he did. So, I mean, I've seen photos, for example, of his office in Trump Tower, and was it the menorah, the candle with the candle, which is a representation of the one that was there in the temple. It is there, and of course he has a Jewish son-in-law. I think this is a very strongly philo-Semitic, pro-Israel individual, viscerally.
Mark 2112 says U.S. presidential elections will be postponed temporarily, kind of like the Patriot Act was temporary.
I'm not sure how that is possible, legally and constitutionally speaking. Bear in mind, the United States has always had elections, even in wartime. Just saying.
Capuchan's channel says you are confusing liberals with leftists.
Interesting point, actually. I mean, to be honest, liberals and leftists are so completely different today from liberals and leftists that I remember once upon a time that I'm struggling. I'm struggling to keep up with these labels nowadays and what they mean.
Natalie Joe says Barnes is a modern time philosopher on par with Socrates and Plato.
Oh.
Very nice compliment. Jeff Rock says, you've both said you disagree with Colonel McGregor's thoughts on Turkey, but to me he sounds like he's talking after hearing intel from people in positions to know. Curious if you all could explore this a bit and whether you see any possible series of events that would make Erdogan enter the ring against Israel.
I'm going to reiterate our view. I mean, this isn't, we don't obviously have secret intelligence, and maybe he does. But, secret intelligence is often wrong. I mean, at the time of the Iraq War, the run-up to the Iraq War in 2003, I went out and said to everybody that I knew that there was no WMD in Iraq. The intel people were saying the opposite. By the way, that's on public record, that I was saying that. The intelligence community was saying the opposite. They were saying there was, and I was right and they are wrong. So don't just assume that because, Douglas McGregor may be told all of these things by his friends in the intel world, if that is indeed what's happening, that they are right. Alex and I have been observing Erdogan ever since he appeared as a political leader. In Alex's case, he has to, because Cyprus is so directly affected by what Turkey does. Remember, there are Turkish troops in Cyprus now, within about an hour's drive from where Alex lives and works. So we have to follow Erdogan. And I can tell you straight away, everything that he's saying is absolute windbag and bluster. He is never going to go to war with Israel.
Yeah. We're also just repeating a lot of what the Greek media is reporting, and the Greek media has a good feel as to what's happening in Turkey. Yeah. Dread Robert says, can Russia afford to leave Ukraine at all? Won't it end up as their Gaza West Bank if they do? Why leave a never-ending problem if the West has greenlit fighting to the last Ukrainian?
Well, that's a very good question. My own view is that the trend of Russian thinking about Ukraine is steadily hardening. back in March of last year, Putin was prepared to do a deal. With every month this war has continued, the terms of that deal are going to become harder. And before long, I'm not convinced that the Russians will be interested in doing a deal any longer at all. They will just come in and say, like, this is what the arrangements are going to be. This is the kind of decisions we're going to make. And, you can all lump it. And we're going to take the necessary steps to protect our western borders, which is what this is all about.
GDog2K2 says, love the cap, Robert. Good taste. And the final question from Jorge Ruiz says, I'm for the Palestinian people overall. There needs to be a ceasefire and a two-state solution ASAP. Great conversation with the Duran and Barnes.
Thank you very much. I think you will probably get your ceasefire. It's going to come. We've been saying this at the Duran for ages. It's not going to come simply in one place. But we've already had a 7-day ceasefire. Now the fighting has resumed. There's more criticism, more opposition. Lloyd Austin has been saying things. Blinken has been saying things. Sooner or later, there's going to be an all-out ceasefire. And John Bolton is furious about it, which is a good sign, I think, given the kind of context that he has, that a ceasefire is eventually coming.
All right. We will leave it there. Thank you, everybody. Take care.